All righty. So today, my guest is Amber, and we're going to have a pretty cool discussion about just what's going on in the dating world these days between men and women, and also how even narcissism can come into play and how people can wind up with them, etc., and how those kinds of relationship dynamics can play out. But how are you today, Amber?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm living the dream over here.
Awesome.
So you have started helping more guys in the dating space. And would I be curious to hear from you? What are the guys telling you these days about like the dating world and their dating struggles? What are you hearing?
So basically, what I've been hearing is just um, that there's no good girls out there. There's no quality girls. Why can't I find a girl like you? And then I try to tell them that this is me on social media. This is not always truth. And then I try to break it down and hit them with that angle. But yeah, I think people are just looking for more of like this illusion of what a girl should be instead of understanding what a girl actually is.
I see. And I mean, I bet you some guys would get like a crush on you or something too. That might be something you would have to find a way to work around at some point because that probably would happen if I had to guess. I mean, has it happened already?
Yeah, I have like I said, there's so many nice and genuine followers that I've like gained their trust, but then some of them are telling me I love you, and I'm like, you don't love me. You like this illusion that I'm presenting, and end up becoming friends, but I'm like they're confusing, like I said, all this superficial stuff and the illusion for love, and I'm like that is not love.
Right.
You know what I
And you know
mean?
what it is because you're being nice and you like you give them a little bit of validation. And when a guy's not used to that, then they can get in the mess. And that really relates also to the narcissism topic because for guys with narcissistic women, we were talking about this before we went live. That's exactly what happens. It's like it's
Hmm.
usually the guys that probably haven't been the most successful with women. Not always, but a lot of times. But
Hmm.
so these guys that aren't as successful, they'll get a woman come in there, usually more attractive than the ones they've been with before. And then she blows their head up and tells them how amazing they are, how attractive
Hmm.
he is, and then throws some sex at them. And then that's all it takes for
It's
that
true.
guy to be like, oh my God, like this woman's my soulmate. This woman's the
Hmm.
person I want to be with forever. And it's because they're not used to it, for one. It
Hmm.
doesn't happen that much. Not many guys get love bombed like that. But I
Hmm.
guess you can see it in this dynamic how that would happen.
It's so true. Like you said, I just feel it's because people are looking outwardly. Once I have this woman, then I'll be fulfilled. So like you said, just a little bit of love bombing, a little bit of attention, and they're just hooked. It's like what they've always been longing for. But then that just leads to disaster because a woman or man is not going to sustain that long term,
Right.
and they're human and they're weak and have their flaws, and then that's when I feel relationships don't last when reality sets in.
Now, do you ask them the question, these guys, that why do you think there's no good women? Or like what do they consider a good woman?
Well, from my experience, what I've heard is basically they want like that validation, that love bombing, good looks, um, classy, but also sexy. It's like, you can't be a prude, but you can't be that what's
Yeah.
304 that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I just feel it's just so particular that it's like the category is so slim that they're not opening themselves up to like enough women. It's like they're too specific, maybe.
And so basically, it sounds like the women that they like are the ones they get rejected by.
I think so.
And that's a common trope. That's a common trope against men and women, right? A lot of times it just looks a little different when it's a woman. Because a woman
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily get friend zoned, they get like
Hmm.
sex zoned. Like the guy will sleep with them and like lead them on, but then not commit. Like that's the
Yes.
friend zone for women. Friend zone for
Yes.
men is no, you're not getting that at all. Like you're not getting
Yes.
anything like no romantic attention. You're going to be interested in her, but nothing's going to happen. You're going to get rejected. But and I
Yes.
wonder if these guys maybe they just don't have charisma or confidence or maybe they aren't as attractive and there's things they could be working on, but I don't know. Are there any common threads that you see?
I feel like, speaking from my own perspective, I feel like those type of men, um, like like a self-aware woman, I could feel that like neediness and that desperation, that's instantly a turnoff, because you can
Mm,
tell, I can feel that they're coming to me, that I'm going to fix everything for them. And I don't want to fix everything for you. I want you to enter this relationship already whole and then share.
I love it. And
You know what I
that's
mean?
so important that you just said that, because I want men to hear that when they come off in that needy way, like you can sense that. You can
Mm,
sense the neediness and approval seeking, and it's instantly unattractive. It's like I mentioned the other day, the guys with an anxious attachment style. I would probably characterize the guys who do that as a guy with an anxious attachment style too. Like they
mm-hmm,
don't feel
mm-hmm.
secure in themselves. And then they're going to be a little needy, a little approval seeking. But that does not make a woman feel safe at all. It does not
No,
help her to trust him at all. In fact, it's the opposite.
exactly. Yeah, a woman needs to know that she's not too much, and that he respects her independence and doesn't feel threatened by it. So if you, I feel like these men are looking for these queens, queens, but you have to be a king if you want a queen. So you can't be threatened by her power. You have to embrace it. She's not trying to compete with you. She wants to thrive with you. You know what I
Right.
mean?
I mean, it's about the guy doing the work on his own. Like when the guys, and it
Yes.
takes a long time, I think, for a man, most of them, to really get to a good place with this. It takes a while. Like a men have to
Mm,
like really work on themselves, work on their confidence, work on their attraction level, work on their careers and becoming someone. And then
mm-hmm,
when they've done that, then they could provide what I would call masculine containment for a woman. And
mm-hmm.
what you mentioned about the guys coming to you being needy and approval seeking, like that's the opposite of a masculine containment, I would say. Like that's actually like them wanting you to give them containment. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
make me feel safe, make me feel like okay. And
Yep.
that's just not going to be a turn on thing for women at all. Like it's just going
No.
to be the opposite.
Exactly. And then from my experience, even if you agreed to that dynamic, like I said, you can't sustain that forever, to be regulating somebody like that. And then the minute you don't do that, it's like everything crumbles, and their vulnerability or their weakness is just spews right overflow. Like, you know
Right.
what I'm saying? It's not
And it's,
something that you can sustain.
no, I mean, because it's not your responsibility to sustain it either. Like, there's a
Exactly.
fine line between like no one's perfect and someone's going to help each other out in a relationship, but there's certain things the other person just can't do for you. Like, you have to do
Exactly.
it yourself,
Hmm.
and it's like you said before, you got to be independent before you even get into the relationship, and that's something I think a lot of people mess up on.
Hmm. They do, definitely. And I feel that people view like vulnerability and flaws, and like how you said, no one's perfect. They think that is so terrible that they have to hide it. So they never actually go deep and do that self work, thinking that it's I'm so weak and I'm such a bad person if I have flaws. But from my own perspective as a woman, I can deal with flaws and I can work through it with you, but you have to show me your flaws. Don't
Right.
go around, don't parade and wear this mask and this facade. You know what I'm saying? I'd rather hear the harsh truth and work through it than have these guys pretending to be macho, but it's such a facade.
Right. And then we should make a distinction here too, because I think what you're talking about, it's one thing to do that with a woman if it's like a dating coach scenario. It's a completely different thing to do that in a romantic situation. Where I would say, like in a romantic situation, a guy should be able to have worked on that already, to be at a
Yes, yes,
certain
yes,
baseline already. And in
yes.
order for a guy to grow, he has to be able to acknowledge his shortcomings and his flaws and the things he needs to work on. And I think it's really important for men to have other men to talk to, like have other
Mm-hmm,
men as well that have been through some of the same things too. So that when they come into a relationship, then they're going to be able to be like a strong presence. And then,
mm-hmm.
because again, most women, they're not going to want to come into a relationship and feel like they have to take care of this guy. Like a lot
Nope.
of women want to be more taken care of, which to
Mm-hmm,
me is completely understandable.
mm-hmm. Taking care of, but like I said, also not feeling threatened when they are independent. You know what I'm
Sure.
saying? And I feel like so many men, when the woman wants to say solitude or to ground herself or just needing space, a lot of people get threatened by that because they feel insecure. And then I feel that just pushes women away even more.
I'm sure. Well, how does that happen? What do you see? Like,
Um, I don't know. I just feel like, so say from my experience, if you're if you and your partner are both participating in like unhealthy lifestyle and you do Netflix and chill all the time, for example, but then you decide I want to start going to the gym and you start leading that healthy lifestyle, I feel if the partner is not self-confident or secure, that threatens them and they
sure.
feel they can no longer relate to the relationship. So it's like both parties have to have that growth mindset, both participants, I mean.
Okay, so even like just doing self care such
Yes.
as the gym, because part of what I was thinking as well is like if the woman was starting to do financially better than the man,
Hmm.
like and the woman starting to do like really good on her own, I could see where some guys might get like, ooh, I don't know, like it can feel a little emasculating sometimes, but not always. I think it just depends on the dynamic that the two
For
people
sure.
have.
Yeah, like I haven't seen that personally, but definitely, obviously, there's lots of women who do make more than men these days, and I
Sure.
could see I could see that would be tricky because it kind of goes against you know how things have always been, and kind of like the feminine and the masculine. So that I would imagine that could be tough. Like you'd have to be a
Yeah.
very secure guy like to experience that.
Absolutely. I don't think it's impossible. I just think there's like subtle things going on in that dynamic where it's like,
Hmm.
I think most women, well, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, I think most women want a guy doing a little better than them financially,
Hmm.
a little bit. Doesn't
Yes.
have to be like night and day. But if it's the other way around, it's almost like there's this subtle, like whether they realize it or not, they might look down on them a little bit. I don't know. But what do you think?
Yeah, because I feel like, at least for me, I feel like I like the man to be a leader and not in a way that it disempowers me because I feel very empowered as a woman, but in a way that like women are just naturally like to lean on the man and have a safe space. But you need a man who's leading to be able to do that. So that's why I do agree that I would like it when the man makes more than me or, is more dominant in a sense. You know what I mean?
Sure. And I think that's it's understandable that it would be that way. And I don't think it's impossible for a man to still be like dominant. And even though he might not be doing as well financially, it's about his personality because it's like about power levels for a man. There's many things that goes into his power level. One
Mm-hmm.
thing is how he looks, one thing is his career, one thing is his money and status, his personality, his charisma, his confidence. But ultimately, like his confidence and sense of assertiveness, that's like really number one. And it just so
Yes.
happens that those other things can really contribute to that. Like
Mm-hmm.
not even as much looks, honestly. Looks can
Mm-hmm.
help, but like that's a different category. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't always contribute to like equal personal power level. But
It's true.
if you've been successful, or maybe you've become famous in some way, you have some money, like yeah, those things are external, but they still give you a little bit of self worth as well. I think people would be lying to say otherwise. It's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
if you show something for yourself, you've done good in your career, you've like impacted people's lives around you in a positive way, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
help your sense of self-worth. But it's that personal power that
Mm-hmm.
ultimately is like there could be theoretically a woman who makes $1 million a year with a guy who makes 100,000 a year, but that guy, if he's got the right level of personal power, there's still going to be the polarity. Like he can
Mm-hmm.
still be like the masculine presence in that relationship, and she can still be the feminine if that guy has it. Now, will it always
Yes.
be that way? No, it won't always be, right? A lot of times, if the
Yeah.
woman's making more, she's going to be the person that is kind of like leading the dynamic, but not
Right.
always.
I agree because energy doesn't lie. So like you're
Yeah,
saying, if he's full, it doesn't have to be, energy could be money. It could be helping others, feeling empowered from all that charitable work, whatever it is, the self-fulfillment. Like you said, the energy is not going to lie. So if a man truly feels empowered himself, that will be the aura he's emitting, and the woman can feel that.
right. And that I think it's number one. Number one for a man, I call it practicing radical self-respect, but there's many elements that go into it. And like we mentioned, some of it can be how you look, your physical health, your mental health, your career, friendships, just how comfortable you are with women as well. Like how
Hmm.
have you been successful in dating? That helps too. All
Yeah,
of that contributes to understanding what's going on in the dynamic. And admittedly, it doesn't happen overnight. Like for guys, there's a lot to learn. And there's a lot to like mess up on along the way because
for
it's
sure.
just part of the learning process. And this is where it's different for women. For women, they have a different perspective, I think, a lot of times, because from the time they become sexually mature, they're learning how to deal with like dudes' advances. So, like, it's a different kind of setup. I call it like a pool table analogy. If you tilt the pool table, the balls go in the direction of the hole, literally
Hmm.
and figuratively. But that's like when women are out in public or in a dating app, that's what it is, right? That the attention just goes to them. And the
Hmm.
prettier the woman is, the more true that is. So, but with a guy could be invisible. Like if you're not out there in the public's eye, you're not attractive or tall. Tall helps too, right? So
Yeah,
all of that, if you're not those things, you can just slip under the radar.
it's true.
So they
It's
just don't
true.
get the work. They don't get that social work because,
It's true.
and
But
that's what helps.
I was just saying that to one of my friends. You know how they have like that, you said height matters. So sometimes those small guys have that like height complex or inferiority. But if they, like I was saying, if only they didn't fall into that like little person, mindset, and just like didn't let that hold them back, women would still be attracted to that confidence and that vibe. Obviously, maybe not as much physically as the tall ones, guilty, but it's the vibe. It's all about the vibe. And
Right.
I used to, as when I was younger, you had to be the most gorgeous, and it was all about physical appearance. And then I got to notice that all those guys seemed to be the most shallow because they didn't have to do any work. They were just good looking. So then I started to say that the ones who were still good looking, but not quite as like those popular guys, they were the ones who had more depth and more attractive personalities, at least from my experience.
I got you. What are the guys like that you had said maybe have the false bravado or false confidence? What do you see in those guys?
So what, those good looking ones I spoke of?
Well, the ones before where you had said you could tell they were overcompensating or it was like fake confidence.
I feel those are the ones. Let me just think for a minute. So yeah, from my experience, they've been the really good looking ones. I feel like everything maybe came easy in the dating world to them. So they never had to really get to know a girl. It's probably just handed to them.
Okay.
And it was so it's just like, I don't know. I can feel that there's no depth, or no, they haven't been through anything because things have been easy. So they haven't had to work for it. And I think same for girls. I fell into that myself when I was younger. I didn't have to even have a personality, because I'm just smile and have a
Right.
lineup back in the day. So that wasn't good. But I acknowledge that, and I did a lot of self work, because you don't want to just be somebody who's always looks and beauty. Obviously, everyone wants it, but there's so much
Right.
more than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that just speaks to the point of like when women, especially when they're pretty, they're going to get attention. Like the personality won't even matter as much at that point. But that only goes so far too, because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as a guy, a woman can be pretty, but if that's all it is, that can get old pretty quick too. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a double-edged sword because I mean, men and women both have their own problems in dating, right? They're going to look a little
Sure.
different, but there's certainly going to be problems. But what are some of the other things that make you would feel unsafe or things that would turn you off in a dating dynamic?
Okay, so the biggest thing for me that makes me feel unsafe is like that abandonment. So even small things, it always goes to that abandonment wound. So if someone doesn't write back to your text message, like even if it takes them a day, or if they don't open the message, or they don't respond to you, like, so that, or if you ask a deep question and then they aren't capable to go to that same depth, and it's a superficial answer. It's just,
Hmm.
as a deep person, it's just those things just trigger me, and I feel, oh my God, and I'm like abandoned. So then I put the wall up, and then it's just like the separation becomes greater and greater because of the lack of communication. You know what I mean?
And I mean, some of that is a compatibility thing there too. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
important for people to know. Like, you got to be pretty much on the same level as
Mm-hmm.
someone else for it to kind of work out. And then what's
Yes.
also going on there is, so there's compatibility, but then there's your attachment style and like your confidence level too, right? So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh,
For sure.
well, if this person's not compatible, like what's the story you tell yourself about it? That's humongous for everyone. Like, that's what I tell
Yes.
guys. It's like, if a woman doesn't reply to you or you get rejected, what's the story you tell yourself about it? Because some
Yes.
guys are going to say like, oh, that means I'm a piece of crap. That means I'm unattractive. That means that
Yes.
all women are terrible. It means
Mm-hmm.
that there's no good women left. Or fill in
Mm-hmm.
the blank with whatever story they tell themselves. But what kinds of story do women tell themselves in that circumstance where like maybe they're rejected or maybe they're left on red or not replied to back right away?
I think the same thing. I just think, and you start questioning your worth, and oh my God, I'm not attractive, and oh, he doesn't like me, and all this same thing. When I'm self-aware, I can coach people and tell them what to do. But when you're in that moment yourself, it just triggers you, and you have to just step back. Um, and what we should be doing is when someone gives you that response and that vibe, you need to be listening to that and deciding, is this something I want to continue to participate in? Instead of continuing that cycle of them, if they're not replying to your messages, then they're not interested. Stop trying to come up with a story. I think we make up the stories as women, and my girlfriends, when we talk, oh, I think he was, he must be working too much, or oh no, I think his family was visiting. Oh, that's what it must be. So it's like, no, if I'm with my family, if I'm on vacation, if I'm anywhere, if I'm on a treadmill and the guy is texting me that I like, I'm responding to you almost immediately. So this whole story of these women wanting to see potential instead of action, we need to stop.
You know what I call that? We
What?
say it in the narcissist space too, but deering. If people catch
Mm,
themselves defending, excusing, explaining, or rationalizing away someone else's behavior, that's a problem. And then you said another
yes.
very important thing too, which is when someone's into somebody, like that person becomes a priority. Like they
Yep.
don't do those little things that they do with people they don't like. Like I said the other day, sometimes it's not that somebody is disrespecting you, but they're not treating you the way they would someone they really liked or
Hmm.
respected would. And it's those little
Exactly.
differences, right? So you like a guy, you're on the treadmill, you respond.
Hmm.
So, I mean, would it be disrespectful not to respond? No, I wouldn't say it'd be disrespectful, right? But you're
Hmm.
treating them in a way because you like them, right?
Yes.
And so
Hmm.
if another guy sees this, he's trying to talk to you, you see his message, this can wait, right? And it's just
Yes.
an example. It's an
Yes.
example of, oh yeah, that's somebody you're not as into. But when
Hmm.
someone's really into somebody, they're gonna swim across oceans for that person. And then like
Exactly.
if you're like as a guy, you get to see all the dynamics of like dating excuses and rejections from women. So like if you're in a bad spot as a guy, all of a sudden you ask women out and the day of the date, there's going to be a lot of women getting sick. Oh, I have a tummy ache.
Oh.
Or what else will they say? And they'll, I got to do some laundry. Like it'd be like all of those things are the equivalent of I'd rather do anything besides go out with you. But
Yeah.
when a woman's into you, it's the opposite. They're gonna try to make room for you, and they're gonna try to
Exactly.
like make time as opposed to just
Exactly.
find the way to do the opposite, not spend time with you.
Exactly. And that's what I read somewhere, that like men are naturally, like they're hunters. So if they like someone, they're going, like you said, swim across the ocean for this woman. They're not going to be too busy. Oh, sorry, I'm so busy. If you were busy, you'd make space if she was the one for you.
Right. But the important thing to note here too, and I can see where guys would blunder this. It's like this only applies from the guy's lens if that woman's into you. Like a guy
Mm,
would be like, "Oh, she wants me to show that I'm interested. She wants me to show that I care or something like that. But it's like that's only true if she's already into you. If she's not into
Mm,
you, then you can do those things and it's not going to
yes,
matter one bit because she's
that's
not
true.
into you. So it's
That's true.
important to know the steps in the process here. So like as the guy, in the beginning, you just don't know. You don't know yet, right? If you're meeting in person, you can probably tell if you're socially calibrated. Okay, I can tell by how this person's looking at me. Like there's something, right? And then you can understand that and take it from there. But online, it's a little more difficult. It's a little
Hmm.
more difficult because there's no body language via text. There's no
It's true.
facial expressions via text. So
Hmm.
you're just going by the LOLs or the emojis or any kinds
Yeah,
of social cues you can think of.
it's so true. And I feel I tried that whole dating app world, and I feel like it's just literally a place for people to try to hook up.
Sure.
And at least I don't think I witnessed one authentic like message. It was all about, oh, I'm just interested in short term. Oh, forget it. And like, just
Mm,
trying to ask you without asking you, do you just want to hook up? And I'm like, oh
I
my
see.
God, this is intense.
And so this was recently for you.
Like a few months ago. Yeah. And
Yeah, yeah.
I just deleted this whole app because I'm like, oh my God. Like, so where do you meet um, anything with substance? Like, are you going to a bar or you're going on an app? Like, I guess you're basically leading your normal life and hoping to encounter someone.
Well, I mean, dating apps to me can be a little bit dehumanizing because you're just like swiping left or right on someone that you see right away. And a lot
Hmm.
of it's just going to be looks oriented. Women will generally get more matches than most men. And depending on the app, like Bumble, you got a women got a message first, right?
Hmm.
Tinder's a little different, but some relationships do materialize from dating apps. But I would say just social media in general, like you're on Facebook or Instagram. Facebook more so because Facebook's more social, I think,
Hmm.
where you'd like, people post things, you can comment on them, people post stories, you can comment on those. And it's like a less creepy way as a guy to talk to
True.
somebody, right? It's like, oh, the woman gives you a story. You can say something to the story. And it's like
Right.
gives you like an in. And if she's
Right.
into you, she can like show you, yeah, I'm into this. We can keep on going. As
Hmm.
opposed to like the cold message, like from nowhere, like, oh hey, what's up? And that's tough. Even if you're an attractive dude and got 1,000 things going for you, it's still going to be tough to pull that off. Like
Right.
the just a message out of nowhere. So to
I know.
me, it's a little easier that way on social media. The dating apps, I get like a dirty feeling from dating apps sometimes. It's just like, eh, it's almost like a drug in a way, where it's just like gambling or something like that. It's just because it doesn't feel real. Like it
I
doesn't
know.
feel real to me until you're talking to them in person, or you see them in person, or at least on the phone. At least on the phone, and you hear someone's voice. That's a lot better.
Hmm.
But just
For
texting on the
sure.
screen, it's like,
I know. And it's hard to tell. Some people are good texters, some aren't. So then you're like, did they mean what they said? And then you're deciphering the text, and it's just like so much added drama that you don't need.
And what are the kind of guys that? How do they text with you? Like the ones that you get attracted to, or the ones that you like? Yeah, this guy's pretty cool. Like I'm gonna see what's going on with this guy.
Like I'm not very active in the dating world. But from my experience, the ones that I would be more drawn to like actually connect with would be the ones that I feel seen by them. So say if they've seen my shares on Instagram or something and they're like, "Wow, you're very strong." So it's like kind of that same love bombing that men like. It's like at least from me, it's kind of like I fall for that. Maybe it's authentic, maybe it's not, but I'm an easy target for when I feel validated and seen because like you said, people like the superficial stuff, but it's rare that they'll see, what's behind that. So when someone does see that, I get sucked right in, so I have to be careful. So like, oh, you're so strong, I've seen what you've gone through. And a lot of time the people that are even willing to go there do turn out to be authentic. But I feel that those are the people that I'm more drawn to, who see what's behind the um, external.
So I guess for you then, how would you make sure it's not some sort of narcissistic guy love bombing? What's the way for you?
Yes. Yeah, because I'm admittedly at least like a self-recovering empath who gets sucked right into the narcissist. I love that style because of my own wound. To be saved, that whole princess.
Uh, damsel in
But
distress.
yes. So I'm a self-recovering damsel in distress into a queen.
Ah.
Um, yeah, but what was the question? Sorry. So how do I not get sucked in?
Well, what would be the red flags you look for? So this guy's not genuine. Like he really is just trying to love bomb because he senses that I really want that validation or approval because it makes me feel seen, heard, and understood. So
Yes.
I guess what would be what you look for? How would you know for yourself? And this is for other women
So
to know too.
right. So I feel you have to ask the right questions, and it's not like be guarded, not in like a bitter way, but just be on guard at first. And when they're saying, "Oh, you're so strong," and this and that, and then you offer the extent of your story. If they can reply with the same depth and keep the conversation going, like you're listening for their answers. So if they can't keep the conversation going, and then it's just like they're like, "Oh my God, this woman's a whack job" or something. It's just like
Right.
you know right away that it was all just a ploy.
Right. And I bet you the covert types in particular, they can be pretty tricky with that, right? Because they can act like, "Oh yeah, I totally get what you're going through, Amber. I've been through the same thing."
Yes.
They have the cognitive empathy
Yes.
and the cognitive empathy can be pretty tricky. And I
Yes.
guess it depends. It's going to depend on a case by case basis, right? Because
It is.
it's not going to be across the board like, okay, a guy does this, that's a problem. Or if a woman does this, that's a problem. Outside of
No,
lying, it's hard to say things like across the board, probably a
it is.
problem. Outright
I think
disrespect, that's another one.
yeah, I think you need to what I've learned is to always listen to your intuition, your gut. You know when something's off or when something feels authentic, and we talk ourselves out of it like, "Oh, it's fine." And then you get stuck in participating in the situationship for longer than you should have, when you
Mm.
should have listened to that gut feeling, that red flag right away, because it doesn't lie.
I think a lot of women get caught up in the situationships, right? Um, has that happened to you?
I feel like not to such an extent, but I see how easily I could go down that path so many times because of my personality type. Like I said,
Mm.
I see potential. Like I'm very empathetic and like intuitive. So I see the potential in men and everyone, but especially men. I see their potential, but then their actions don't align with that. But
Mm.
I keep seeing the potential because I see the good in them, and then their actions just never back it up. So the key thing is, look, words mean nothing if they're not followed by the actions.
That's a big one. I hear a lot of women say that to me about they'll go for a guy's potential, but then like the actions don't follow through with it.
Exactly.
And I tell people if you're going to be constantly looking for like who they used to be if you're in a relationship with them or you're
Yes.
hoping they change into somebody else, probably not the best. And I think and the older that we get, the more true that is, especially for the latter. Like it's one thing when you're both young like, okay, you're in college, you're both 22 or something like that. Yeah, it's going to be more like, oh, I wonder what the guy's potential is.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're still thinking that way at like 35, 40, oh, I see his potential at 35 to 40, not quite as good anymore, right? So it's a little more
Exactly.
understandable in college, but that would change. It would change over
Exactly.
time. But
Yep.
who they are in the present, that's for everybody. Who they
Mm-hmm.
are in the present, because
Exactly.
two things. Most people don't want to change. And unless you see them do the actions to change, they're probably not going to.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you better be happy with who they are right now because chances are, unless you see them putting in the footwork to change, that's who they're going to be and continue to be.
Exactly. So I agree. The actions, and then do they take the accountability? So, like we said before, it's okay to be imperfect. Nobody's perfect. But if they cancel on you at the last second, or they truly couldn't make your date, for example, which that does actually happen sometimes, if they apologize sincerely and then own it and tell you like they're not coming up with some bogus excuse, then you can respect that And then the next time you would see that their actions, they're not doing it every single time. And those
Right.
occasional times when it does happen, they own it and they take the accountability and they apologize.
Right. And the big thing I look for with that is if they would offer a reschedule. Oh,
Yes.
like, oh, can we reschedule? Or like, I'm really sorry this happened. Can we reschedule for something? Because if they don't offer the reschedule, yeah. And if they don't even like try to act like they're sorry in any way, it's like, no, that's just like the rejection. And this is what
Yes.
guys have to learn. It takes some time to understand like what are the real rejections, what are rejections, and what are genuine, like I couldn't actually make it, because there's a
Mhm.
difference, right? And
Exactly.
they can look similar, but it's really just like the covert way to reject. And women would say, well, it can be unsafe for me to be direct, like even via text, and the guy would maybe blow up at them if they just
Mm.
say, hey, you know what, I'm not interested. But I have had women say that to me. There's been women who have said that, and it's like, okay, it doesn't feel good, but it's like, hey, at least you told me. And
Right.
if you have an emotional maturity level, you don't have to be like, oh, you weren't even attractive anyway. It's like, no. Like, and that's what it is, what some guys do. So you
Yeah.
just let it go. Like, oh, thanks for letting me know. And then that's it. I would always
Exactly.
prefer that. I would always prefer the bitter truths better than the sweetest lies. But that's just
Hmm.
me.
Yeah, me too. I'm like, why do you want to waste time wondering, are their cancellations sincere? Just say that, oh, this is not going to work after all. Or, yeah, it's totally like a blow initially to the ego. But at least you don't get so attached and wrapped up and then heartbroken when you find out the truth.
Sure, sure. And I think the other thing you had me thinking about there was like one of the reasons you were telling me your last relationship ended, and it was because you had said like when you had issues or you had emotions that he wasn't able to hold the space for you. So maybe you could share a little bit about that because I'm sure that's a pretty common dynamic.
Yeah, so basically, like I'm all about I can get through challenges. I'm not looking for an easy relationship, none of that. But the defining moment, I think, when I knew that, okay, wow, this is really not going to be able to sustain itself was every time, like, life, we were together for a long time. So life got harder and more challenges were starting to appear as you navigate life and children and everything. And then every time I'd come to him, like, oh, I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling depressed or I need your help with this or I need your help with that. It was like he would shift the blame to me
Mm-hmm.
and yell at me and like have an anxiety attack because he couldn't handle, I guess, the emotion himself. And it was just I began to just stop even coming to him because it was easier to just navigate the problems on my own. So I'm like, if in my vulnerable moments when life is challenging, if you can't turn to your spouse, then what is this relationship even for?
Right. Or were there any particular things you were coming to
Oh,
him with? Was like financial or emotional or just?
okay. So we had moved from Canada to United States. That was a huge one. Left everybody we ever knew behind for
Oh,
bigger
you
and
were from
better
Canada.
things. Yeah, Montreal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I
so
can get a
leaving
little bit
them.
of an accent.
Yeah, I heard that I'm a like kind of French, kind of Canadian because Montreal's French. But anyway, so leaving, for the land of opportunity, the whole story. And I really was like in a depression for the first year because not only did I not have any friends or family, we moved from city to country. So that was like, an adjustment as well. And I was just like, I want to go home and visit on the weekends. And he would just yell at me and be like, we moved here for a reason. And like he almost like wouldn't let me go back. And I think it was because he was also feeling the same way, but he couldn't bear for me to voice that. So it's like he shut it down and shamed me for it. So it was just like that just was such a foreign experience because I'm like, this didn't make any sense that if you're moving to get away with your partner, you should be fine if you had each other to navigate this new experience. But it was me against him, and he wasn't embracing what I was going through.
I mean, it's so important for a man in particular to be in a good spot with things. And it's so important for him to be taking care of himself so that when that kind of situation arises, and maybe he's struggling with it too, but he can like try to be there for you through it, but then also be cool. Like it also be like not turned off by it and then externalizing and lashing out at you. It's like that's an opportunity to be like, babe, I get it. I get it. I feel that too, but we're going to be okay. Like there's a way
Yes.
that a guy that is having masculine containment would handle that situation. And there's a way that a guy who is not in a good place is going to handle that situation. And they can be pretty stark. The difference can be pretty stark between the two of them. So
Yes.
that's what I would tell guys. But in the beginning, and yeah, someone commented here, the isolation can be control, which is absolutely true too. I don't know if that was part of that dynamic too at this point where you go from candidate to there. You are isolated away from your support system too.
Yes. I know people have said that that might have, I honestly never ever suspected that he was somebody who was malicious or would purposely bring me into this. So I still have a hard time believing he would do that, but I know that
Possible.
that's one of the key characteristics they say of that
Sure.
situation.
And what did
But
he do
back,
right in the beginning? Well, go on. Go on.
I was just going to say back to that for a moment, and now I just lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? Oh, what you just said honestly gave me goosebumps when you just said, "We got this, babe," or whatever. And I'm like, that's all I would have needed to hear is "We got this" or "I'm here for you." I just needed some breadcrumbs to calm me down, and I would have been fine. But that's the thing, when they're so at odds within themselves, even the thought of that was too much to ask for. But
Right.
go on. What were you going to say?
So, well, that's two things there now. So, one, I think a lot of men just don't handle like women's emotions very well, period. Where like, because women can be sometimes moody, they can be, I don't know, it can come at guys in all different kinds of ways. And again, there's ways for women to do these in an appropriate way, and there's ways that are not as appropriate, like more immature ways. But either way, like if the better a guy is with himself, the better he'll be able to handle all of those possibilities. And again, there is going to be ways that like if a woman's like out of control and like lashing out at you and
Mm-hmm.
just like being like too much, like yeah, that is a thing. That could definitely be too much. And if they're like every conversation with her feels like a battle and she's like
Mm-hmm.
being really brittle and antagonistic, it's like
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no one's gonna like that. And that's different.
No.
Like that's different than a woman coming to you with her emotions, I think, and just like looking for support and looking for protection, safety, trust, and love. But I could even hear people arguing already, like, oh, but even when the woman's being antagonistic, that is also what she wants. Where it's like, well, that could be, but you got to have the maturity to come at it in a different way. Like you don't need to be
Right.
battling them with it at that point. It's like there's a way to come to your partner with things, and there's a way that's not going to have as good of an impact because
For
how
sure.
things are said go a really far way.
For sure. And definitely women are guilty. And I almost fell into that early on myself. We want to control our partner, tell them what to do, be their mother. So the women who are approaching their spouse or their partner like that from like a condescending, "You're going to do what I tell you." Of course, men have no interest in being emotionally available for that, and they shut down themselves.
Sure.
So both ends have to be self-aware and healthy, for that masculine containment to work.
Sure. Oh, and there's the other thing about that, Joe, too. There's a reason why there's a dating and courting phase because you're going to learn in that phase who am I compatible with? And like the longer you go through that phase, you're going to see them in more life situations. The season's going to go by, and you're going to notice, okay, this is how she comes to me. If like she's
Mhm.
having an issue, she's going to be the girl that like tries to rip your head off, or she's going to be the girl that is going to be a little more chill and understanding, and you can work with her as a team. That's
Mhm.
the big thing. Like when real relationships are a thing,
Mhm.
it's like how's your foundation? Can you
Mhm.
come together and solve problems together? Can you work as a team? Can you collaborate? And like, what does that look like? It looks like being
Mhm.
able to have the tough conversations. It looks like being able to be honest with one another and self reflect. But
Mhm.
when someone's going to be the person that's really antagonistic and belittling, whether it's the guy or the woman, that's going to be tough. And I
Yep.
don't know who would want to sign up for that, but that's what the dating process is for. It's like if you start seeing that come up and that's how they're trying to solve problems, or maybe even creating more problems, that's a problem. Like that's
It
not
is.
someone you're going to be able to have like a peaceful and loving relationship with. And
No.
whenever I even say things, I know what people are going to say. So some women would say to that, "Oh, that's what my narcissistic guy friend said. My narcissistic boyfriend said, I just want peace." And it's like, well, there is an extent to where That is a thing to say if the other person really is being antagonistic and belittling. But saying you want peace when someone's actually just trying to work with you and trying to solve a problem with you, that's the not the right time to say I just want peace. It's like, no, this person's trying to work with you and collaborate and solve a problem, and you're just trying to deflect and say I just want peace. Like, no,
Right.
that's not the way to say it. I could picture
Right.
myself saying I want peace if a woman's trying to rip my head off or something like that, and like just really being antagonistic. I could imagine wanting to say that then, but then
Yes.
I have to ask myself at that point, why am I even with this person? Like,
Exactly.
if this
I
is how
think
it's
it
coming to me.
exactly, that's what I think is so important is like you said, to see people through disappointments and through setbacks and see their reaction, observe that before you get too, committed to that relationship, and also to practice such firm boundaries, because if someone is trying to rip your head off, I don't feel you should be trying to retaliate. You should be
Oh,
owning your boundaries, like, I'm sorry, but this is not working for me, and like you would disengage from that toxic behavior. You know what I'm saying? And you'd end it right there. Because like me early on, I wasn't very self aware. So I didn't notice the tactics of the blame shifting, the gaslighting. So it was just a complete fog. And then you just, sooner or later, you're just so entangled in it, you don't know what's what anymore. So you have to really be self aware and practicing those boundaries.
yeah, I mean, and that's where the compatibility part comes in too, right? Where so much of a relationship is compatibility. Once two people are emotionally mature and independent, then it's, are you compatible? Do
Mm-hmm.
you work together well as a team? Because not everyone you don't work well with is going to be toxic or a narcissist or borderline. It's like, no, not always. Not always. Like, definitely it can happen, but not
Mm-hmm.
always. A lot of
Right.
it, once you've done the work, then I think it becomes more, all right, are you guys compatible? And that's the thing to to look for. And what's compatibility? It's like, well, you respect each other's boundaries. Another thing that can happen to me, if someone's boundaries like really seem ridiculous to me, it's like that might be more of a compatibility issue too. It's like, if I think your boundaries are ridiculous, that might be something to, maybe this is not a good thing for me, right?
For
Because it's
sure.
not like she did anything wrong. It's just that more of a compatibility thing at that point.
But what would be an example of a absurd boundary or something? Like,
What's a good example of that? Um, so maybe someone saying, and this wouldn't be a thing for me, but like, oh, someone who goes to like AA or something like that, they wouldn't even want to like be with somebody that ever has a beer.
oh,
It's like,
I see.
okay, that I can understand it, but to me, that's just not something that, and not even that I would drink very much, but it's just an example of something
Oh,
that like
yes.
is a boundary for them. Some people might say it's controlling, but it's like, no, you're totally allowed to say, I don't want to be with someone with drinks. That's totally fine to me. That's like your
Right.
preference, because when you're in a relationship with somebody, you're a team now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people would say, oh, boundaries only impact you, but it's like, no, that's not necessarily true. Like, if you're in a monogamous relationship, what is that? It's
Right.
like you are coming to an agreement that you're both not going to get with other people. So
Mm-hmm.
that agreement is impacting both of you.
Right. And I think a boundary should be like, that sounds like that sounds like control. So I'm like, if I'm choosing to not drink alcohol because it doesn't work for me, you shouldn't expect your spouse to not drink it because of your choice. So it's like you'd have to respect one another's boundaries, not trying to change each other. You'd have to. That's what I feel anyway.
Right. Oh,
So
yeah,
that
I
sounds like
think
control.
it could be compatibility though too, I think, where like someone knows, you know what, I don't want to be around someone drinking because it's gonna make me want to drink, perhaps. And like, it's one thing if I see it at a bar or something like that at a restaurant, but in terms of my romantic partner, it's just not what I prefer. I mean, I could totally
Mm-hmm.
see that. Like, I'm not dissing that boundary for themselves. I might think it's ridiculous. Like, I wouldn't like it per se,
Mm-hmm.
but they're totally okay to have that. And that's just one example. I'm trying to think of other examples out there of things I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't like. And they're little things. They just pop up. They can pop up.
Right.
And when they happen, or like the things that would bother them, for example. That's another good one. Like a little thing and they get really bothered by it and you don't
Mm-hmm.
understand it. That to
Yes.
me is like, I don't know about
Yeah.
this one here. But it's just, it's compatibility.
Yes.
I
It's
wouldn't
a
say it means they're
totally
toxic.
right. Yeah, because you just don't resonate with their vibe. It's like if you're
Right.
somebody who's easygoing and lets things roll off your back, and then they're upset and anxious over everything. This is like a not. It's not a flow. It's just
Right.
awkward.
Exactly. And then and that's the other thing about it too, where sometimes people can get really upset and angry, and it doesn't always mean they're right. Like people can be upset and angry, and just because you're upset and angry, like doesn't mean like what you're talking about is even legit. Now, it
Hmm.
doesn't mean it's always not legit either, right? But it just depends. It depends on
Yep.
the dynamic. Where I've seen people get really upset, and there's usually a formula to it. It's like they expect something from you that they didn't communicate, and then when that didn't happen, then they can get really angry because they expected you to do something. It kind of comes from a sense of entitlement, I feel like. But
Hmm.
those people get mad, and this happens in the business world too. And I'm like, when they do that though, it's like, ugh, like it's just such a turnoff to me. It's
I
like, dude,
know.
communicate if it's going to be that
Yes.
important to you, because we're not all going to be on the same page of, okay, this is how you should handle this situation. This is how you should handle this next situation. It just depends. Everyone's so different. Everyone has different preferences, boundaries, etc.
Exactly. I feel like those people, like you said, exactly, they're coming from a sense of entitlement, like almost that you should be a mind reader and anticipate their every need, like that narcissism. Like one example for me, if I need to go and turn the washing machine on in the evening, just because that's the only opportunity I had. So now I'm putting the cycle on, and I put it on an extra long cycle, like for stain removal. If my old partner would come in and the washing machine was on at night, he truly believed that I set out to use that machine at the same time he needed to use it. And how dare I do that? Because that's the only time he can use it to wash his work clothes. So I'm saying,
Uh,
some people just truly feel that your behavior should be catered around them, and it's like, no, that's not how it goes.
yeah. So he was battling you. Like that's an example of a small thing, like a mountain being made out of a molehill, right? And that's just like a little thing that turns into a big thing. But if that happens consistently enough in a bunch of different areas, now you're into a big problem. Right? Now you're
Right.
into a big problem where you're fighting all the time.
And the even worse than that, the fighting phase um, was for a while, but then I just disengaged completely, and I'm like, stop the cycle. If you'd like to use it, go right ahead. If you need to use it, use it. So I'm like, that works. I'm sure, as you know, that's the system, the technique that works with narcissists is like just
Yeah,
disengage. But you can't have a lasting marriage if you disengage. So
sure.
it only works if it's somebody who's not living in your home. You know what I mean?
Right. And that was you checking out, right? That was like
Exactly.
you emotionally disengaging. I mean, and that's why they say the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference,
Yes.
because that's when you know it's really over, when there's no more fights, there's no more, I hate you, and the passions are no longer there.
Hmm.
But
Exactly.
I was going to ask you before, in the beginning, because you must have done something right in the beginning. And this is the thing, people get uncomfortable talking about it, but there are things narcissistic guys do that do work well in the beginning. And like
Right.
people label it as the love bombing. But I think that's does it a little bit of an injustice, because there's more to it than just love bombing. There's other things going on there that are hitting the attraction cues, that are making the woman feel like into him, trusting him, and just like wanting to be with him. And
Mhm.
from the guy's perspective, like some of the guys you were telling me about in the beginning, they're probably not even getting to that point. So there's
Right.
things for those guys to learn from the narcissistic guys in a way, not so that they can exploit and do things toxically, but like just to see, like, okay, because name me one woman that doesn't have a narcissistic ex. I
True.
struggle to think of any that do.
Hmm.
So, like, well, what does that mean? It means that there must be something all these guys are doing right in the beginning. And this is a perspective that women don't think about much, because it's more of a guy's problem thing. Like, why would they
Hmm.
care? Why would they
Right.
care? Like, they only see the results of the kinds of guys in their life. So, oh, that guy was like this, so I have to act accordingly. But for the big group of guys out there that are struggling completely and getting no dates, to them, They see the guy that's narcissistic that all of the women are complaining about, and they're still getting further than them. So, like, there's things to learn there. And again,
Right.
not to be as abusive and as a jerk as they would be, but there's certain things they must be doing. So, what did this guy do for you in the beginning?
So that's a question. Honestly, I try to make sense of this long journey and how did it go from, you know, one way to the next. And I was so young, number one. And I think because I'm that empathetic type of person and wanting to be saved, we went over this. He came in and he's that complete. So they say narcissists don't, they need their sense of self, like they need the supply from someone else. So he was able to come in and take me right in as his supply, and I was able to go in as an empath and just try to save him. So it's like it was a perfect storm. So he, saved me, take care of me. You can be a stay-at-home mom, which I always wanted to do. You don't have to work. And not that I didn't want to work, but I wanted to be with my children. So it's just like, that's fine. I don't need to speak up because I have everything I could dream of. And he was calm and peaceful, but didn't say much. It wasn't much communication, but it wasn't chaotic at first. And like I said, only as life got harder and my kids got older and they developed their own voices that I realized this dynamic was only working if I didn't really have my own personality, if I didn't challenge him, if I didn't speak up. And he didn't even do it in a mean way. He truly wasn't a mean person. He's more of the covert narcissist, I would say. It's just that I couldn't like overshadow him. I couldn't have my own opinion. I couldn't disagree because he wanted to debate that, and like never violent or really a mean person, but it's just only his opinion could exist.
Hmm.
And the circular conversations, and I just started to disengage because it was just too exhausting.
How long into the relationship did that start?
The disengagement, or
Well, just the kind of battle where like his opinion was the only one that mattered.
well, like we met so young that I didn't really need to have many opinions. We were teenagers, so it was just fun, right? So I noticed he was like that in school with teachers. His mother's like that. I believe he comes from a household like that. Very debate at the table, debate, debate, debate. And I'm not a debater. You can have your opinion, doesn't concern me. I believe what I believe type of personality. So I witnessed him doing it from the beginning, but with me, if say he stayed out late and didn't call me, all those stupid petty teenager problems, and I tried to discuss it with him, we'd have our debates over that, and there'd be never any accountability. So it would just end in screaming matches because I used to engage. But then I just kept quiet, was a mom, was busy in the marriage, and then only maybe within the last 6 years when we moved to the United States and real issues started presenting themselves with children and all, what you navigate in parenthood. So I'd say for the last 6 years is when I really was like, wow. And then I noticed he was gaslighting me and lying. And I'm like, I couldn't even believe that this was probably going on the entire time that he was a liar. You know what I mean? It's like you
Right.
have that cognitive dissonance when you just become like, whoa, what have I just lived?
Right, right. And so it happens slowly over time, and then you realize it though too. And so then all of a sudden you realize, whoa, I'm being gaslit. It's just not a good situation anymore.
Exactly.
And so you
Like,
got out of there, like, because you were with him for a long time.
hmm yeah. And then it was like, I don't know, at least a year of me gaslighting myself. And I used to have to talk with my mom, who was very, present on vacations and in our life to say, no, this did happen. So I was gaslighting myself, like, he can't be that bad. Oh, he didn't do that, did he? And she's like, yes, he did. And it was a year of trying to find my own sense of self and not gaslighting myself. And even still, it's sad because it's like you still care about like the abuser because you're attached to them and you've lived with them for so long, but you know that you have to choose them or choose yourself. You can't choose both with somebody like that.
Absolutely right. And so you were gaslighting yourself by deering, basically, defending, excusing, explaining, or rationalizing away his behavior. What were some of the ways you did that? Just like, oh, it wasn't that bad, or he didn't really do that, or
I think it's because when I was enabling him and keeping peace, like the regulator, as I call it, we had good times and we'd have fun times, we'd go on vacation. So I'm like, there's those memories that overshadow like you just tend to go to those good times. And then you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Oh, he had an episode, it wasn't so bad. He's nice again. So it's like the
Right.
cycle. So I think it's because it wasn't all bad and it wasn't very abusive or violent. It was just more of like losing myself. So it's like you're like, well, you have this and you get to stay home and you have a good life and you have a nice house. So it can't be that bad. Don't be so spoiled. Like you
Right.
feel, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So it's like you almost give yourself, it's almost like you felt obligated to stay or something like that because, oh,
Hmm.
this is how it is. We have a family together, and it feels like there's an obligation of sorts, I guess. But that's part of the trauma bond too. And again, there's various degrees of this stuff too. Like some of them are really severe, some are less severe. But at the end of the day, relationships break up even if there isn't abuse or a narcissist sometimes. They can just break up anyway. Like people can grow in different directions.
Hmm.
And that's the thing about any relationships in this day and age. You just don't know. You don't know if someone's going to grow in a different direction than you. You can
Hmm.
presume they wouldn't. You can think you're aligned in a way, but life has a funny way of showing up and
For sure.
surprising people. So it's hard to say
It's,
in this day and age.
it's so true. And I think I have like that old fashioned mindset that I didn't get married to think that it would end. Because I'm not somebody who I'm not moving on to the next thing. Like I'm fine with all of that, but like just came a point when you're like, this is not a way to live.
Right. I've heard that a lot. The I wasn't meant to be divorced. I've heard a lot of people say that. Women who were in abusive relationships, they were like, and they really want to give the guys the benefit of the doubt. And
Hmm.
in some of the situations I'm thinking of, these guys did not even deserve the benefit of the doubt at all. But the
Right.
woman's trying. And what is it? I mean, it is the trauma bond, but there's also some of that programming in there. Maybe they saw it in their parents growing up, so they were conditioned to think,
Hmm.
oh yeah, the way a narcissist will act is what I'm supposed to associate with love. And
Yeah.
you see that, and it's hard to break free of that,
Right.
especially when you have kids with them.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, think, there's nothing really more magical than creating other human beings with someone. Like, there's nothing like that in the world, so I can totally see how it becomes harder.
Hmm. And like I said, I see potential. So it's like I knew I'm like, if only you do this and you address, your childhood traumas and you do this and you work through it, if only you do that, you're going to be healed and we can do it. And he wouldn't have any of it. And he would just blame me for all of it. It's your fault of this. And it was just blame instead of accountability. And I'm like, I know the kind of person I am. I'm kind and empathetic. And he projected and truly believes that I'm like a toxic, manipulative person. So I'd also have to live in that shadow, and I'm not willing to do that.
I mean, that externalizing of the blame thing, that's a big thing the character disordered people will do. Like, they're
Hmm.
not going to take any accountability for things. It's always going to be
Nope.
someone else's fault. Maybe it's your fault. Maybe if it's everyone else's fault. Anyone's fault but theirs.
Yep.
So, and this is also where it's important to remember, like they say now, like narcissism and other character disorder issues, not a trauma issue per se. Like trauma can make it worse, but it's
Hmm.
not the same. Like it's not the same as that. And so what happens is that when there's trauma, like that's not what creates narcissism. Like they say, there's
Hmm.
genetic component is very big, 77%, and the trauma aspect can be another part of it, but that's a different part. And
Mm.
then from there, it helps people in your spot to see, okay, it's not the trauma that's doing this. It's really just this character issue that needs to be addressed. The personality disorder needs to be addressed. They're two different things. Like
Wow.
some, I've seen narcissists go to therapy for trauma, and their personality disorder gets 0% better because it's not what's being worked on. Trauma, a separate entity. And when you see the results like that, because there are some narcissists who go to therapy, but unless they're being honest and unless they're addressing the right things, nothing's getting better. I mean, a lot of
Right.
narcissists are going to therapy because they want support, validation, they
Yep.
want to weaponize what the therapist says, they want to be able to win arguments. Maybe they're court ordered. Maybe they've
Mm-hmm.
gotten a massive ultimatum. But the therapist can only help them to the extent that the person's being honest. And that's everybody, though. Like
Mm-hmm.
a therapist or coach, counselor, anyone, they can't help you
I know.
unless you're being honest, unless you
I
have some humility. And if you're not,
ex-
nothing's going to change.
exactly, and I witnessed him doing that to a therapist. All he spoke about was me. So I'm like, that's the thing. They're just going to do the smear campaign, and truly everybody around is like, how could she leave you? You're such a nice person. Because it's like they just go and they write the story, and I'm like, you have to be okay to be the villain in their story.
And that is going to be true, right? If you put your foot down, you will become the villain in their story. And we
Yep.
talked about this before you went live too, but all it takes is if someone doesn't ever put their foot down and then they just go along to get along, those kinds of relationships can last a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can be a toxic person, a narcissistic person, but if the other person never stands up to them, never puts their foot down, they can go on indefinitely. Doesn't mean the relationship is healthy anyway. But then when someone starts putting their foot down, having them thoughts of their own, then the problems come out. And then all of a sudden, now it's no longer working too good anymore.
Exactly. It's the enabler. You know, the toxic person needs the enabler most often, so, or all the time.
It can be a toxic mesh. And now it's not always like the puzzle pieces fitting together, but a lot of times it is. Where like
Mm-hmm.
there's the one person who's a little more empathetic, maybe a little more of a people pleaser sometimes, maybe not as assertive, maybe weaker boundaries, etc. And sometimes it doesn't happen that way too. Sometimes there is someone who's fairly confident and they get sucked in and like
Mm-hmm.
duped and then torn down. That happens too. But I think the puzzle pieces can come together. Usually that's what happens because
Mm-hmm.
when they're in a relationship with a narcissist, there's going to be some disrespect in there. Almost always. Like there's going to be disrespect. And at that point, it's do you notice it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when someone's in the trauma bond, maybe they don't notice it. Or maybe they forget. Or maybe they
Yes.
deer. They defend, excuse, explain, rationalize. But there's going to be something. But
Mm-hmm.
if you were, I think with women in particular, they want to give the benefit of the doubt in some ways, or they'll see the potential, like you said. I think for guys, it's a little different. Like guys tell themselves different stories in that dynamic. Like, oh, I don't want to give up on her, or I don't want to abandon the kids, or what else would they say to themselves? My dad left my mom, and so I never want to be that guy. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of stories they'll
Yeah.
say to keep themselves stuck in a bad situation, or they like being the martyr sometimes too. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm stuck in this terrible situation, and they'll talk about it with people and it's like they want to
Yes.
get validated that they're stuck in the terrible situation. But
Yes.
meanwhile, it's like the Eagle song. So oftentimes it happens that we live our lives in chains and we never even know we have the key. Like they have the key.
Mm-hmm.
They could leave, but they've told themselves these stories that keep them stuck.
Yep.
Now, is it always that way? No, nothing is always. It's all going to depend on each individual situation because it depends on the kind of narcissist, if it's covert, if it's a religious or spiritual or whatever it would be, right? It's going to depend. And then it's going to depend on the other person too. What kind of person are they? Why are they there? And so everything depends on the individual situation.
It's true. That's why basically let's watch for their actions, not their words, and maybe realize a lot sooner.
Absolutely. So, I mean, what else did you want to mention about like the guys and the dating and the things that you
Um,
could see them doing better or things that would help like the woman feel more safe and trusting or at least just open to a dating situation with them because in the beginning that's what it's all about, like
right.
getting past the what makes it open, like what's even going to give him the opportunity.
It's a good question. I haven't really given it much thought. So, like for me, like I said, I think when they show an interest in, my life, like, my struggles, my character, what I've been through, that is really like when I start to feel open. I don't know if that's for every woman. But I think just knowing what if a woman knows that she's not too much and that whatever she speaks to him, he's going to be open, to have a conversation. I just feel like that makes us feel comfortable.
Right.
And, not just like this joke, it's all over the place. The WYD, what you doing text. Stop just texting them what you doing. We know what you're asking us. So just, treat them with respect in class. And even if your motive is to just sleep with them, if she decides to do that, that's her choice, but at least show a little bit of effort. And then if she does that, it would be by choice, not because of your stupid game you're trying to approach her with. So just show an interest. Obviously, if she's a girl without substance and she's, maybe there's some women out there just as superficial. I'm not saying to, pour your whole heart into these women who are also, coming at the dating world the same way. But there are still good women out there. There are good men out there. So just because most of them are toxic right now, don't change yourself and play that game. Show up authentically. Treat her with respect and see where it goes.
Sure. And I think it becomes important for people to pay attention to, like, what are they feeding themselves content wise? Like when you learn about dating or commiserate about dating, like what are you feeding yourself? Are you consistently feeding yourself the other women are awful or men are all narcissists or fill in the blank? Because like what you focus on will expand. Like, and if you focus on all the people who are no good, that's going to be like first and foremost in your mind. And again, I totally get it with the narcissism space where if you've been through that, you're going to want to really make sure you don't go through that again. And so how do you do that? Well, you learn all about it. You learn all about it. You learn to trust your own perception of reality again. You learn to trust yourself. And then, you work on your side of the street, maybe the things that you could have done better later on. And that doesn't mean it's your fault. It just means that no one's perfect and everyone can improve somehow, right? And then you move forward. So that's a whole process. But once you get through that process, what are you focusing on then? Because where I've seen a lot of people go through the narcissism space and then they go to a completely different realm. And some of those realms are good. Some of those realms not so good, right? Because it just depends, right? Because there's like a community. The narcissism space is a community. But it's one of those communities where I wouldn't recommend just stay forever. Now, it's different for me as a creator. Like I can be there with the other creators, etc. But even so, like there comes a time where I might get bored of talking about it. I get tired of it, right? You talk about it all the time. It's like, okay, time to move on to the next phase at some point. But it depends, especially if there's a business involved that kind of hamstrings you a little bit too. But but I see some people go to the man-hating realm from the narcissistic space. That happens to some people. Like every man is an abuser. Every man's a piece of trash. And they go down that round. And honestly too, so for men, a lot of female narcissists and borderlines, it's probably their gateway to like more of the red pill space and to becoming a MGTOW person. Like they got burned. And that's why I've kind of been thinking about this recently too, but it's like the red pill people, it's similar to a way to what the narcissism space is to women, except the difference is I think the narcissism space is generally more healthy. Like it's a more like positive. The red pill space can go sideways into some not so good areas, but like what brought them there can be similar. I think that's something that maybe when people look at that space, the red pill space, maybe understanding that part of it can give people a little more empathy towards the situation. Not empathy to tolerate disrespect, but just empathy to like see how it happened. Because it maybe is more understandable that way. And the same thing I think of when the women go to the man-hating direction. It's like, well, when you look at their experience and they've been abused and severely mistreated, understandable. But it's just a matter of what's that wound look like? Because when someone's still wounded, you can see it. You can see it when someone's still wounded, right? You can see it by what bothers them. Like the things that bother them are the cues. They're the clues, like pointing them in the direction. So the women who would start hating on men, to me, there's a little bit of a wound there. Like there's still resentment that
For sure.
I'm resentful. And perhaps understandably to an extent, but there's still a point where I feel like you should want to move through it. And the same thing I would say to the red pill guys that are really resentful about women. It's like, okay, It's understandable. Maybe you got burned, maybe you got cheated on, or something happened. But do you want to stay resentful, or do you want to move through it? And then what does
Yes.
moving through that look like? So again, I don't like gendering it completely, but it's going to look different. Like, so men's issues with it turn into certain things. Women's issues with it can turn into certain things. But I've also seen people grow through the narcissism space, and they do something really helpful and productive. They're like, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to really work on like maybe dating stuff and trying to help cultivate healthy relationships for people. Or maybe they go into the spiritual realm. But it's important to be mindful of it though, because I see it go both ways. I see it
Hmm.
go healthy directions and then not so healthy directions.
It's true. I feel like you need to, from my own experience, it's like, oh, at first you're like motivated to leave the toxic, dysfunctional dynamic. And then it's true, you don't really know what you are. Are you mad? Are you wounded? Are you this? So it's like I realize you need to just I feel like you need to step away from the dating until you are healed and until you have a clear sense of what you want now or who you are, what role you played, so that you don't project it onto the next partner. Because basically the space I'm in, I'm like still trusting. It's like it hasn't scarred me to that extent, but I'm very hyper independent in a sense as like a trauma response. That's like I push people away now because I've had to learn to do everything on my own. So it's like you maybe I'm not letting people in enough. So it's like it manifests in so many different ways, even if you think you're fine. So if you're trying to get into a relationship and you still have these defense mechanisms, you're going to push everyone away or do all this, like you said, this
Right.
crazy. It's going to manifest into these domains that you don't want it to.
Right. And that's why it's so important for people to be in a good place before they even start. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, hyper independence. What's that? It can be a sneaky way to have a fear of intimacy. It can
Mm-hmm.
be a sneaky way to avoid a barrier to intimacy at that point, because you can just be the hyper independent person and never have to risk opening up and getting hurt. And granted, I've certainly been there before, absolutely. And it's the trickiest one to move through, because it's like you're good. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm good. I'm good on my
Yep.
own. Right. And from comparison to being not so good on your own, it feels great. Like, it feels great to not be like needy and approval seeking and needing someone else to make yourself feel better about yourself. So it's awesome. But I've been really thinking about recently, it's like, and it's a hard concept to see, but I'm rereading for the first time Dr. George Simon's book on character. And I read Teddy Roosevelt's speech the other day, The Man in the Arena. And he was talking about concepts in there that I was like, okay, it's kind of pointing to the things where the hyper independence is not good. It's like, no, it's actually like weak, he said. And then like from when if you're in a bad spot, it doesn't seem weak at all, right? Because you got to grow to that place. Like, you got to grow to where you can even be independent and hyper independent. But once you're there, then it takes more courage to do the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
It takes less courage just to stay hyper independent as what you are. But it
Yep.
takes more courage to risk opening yourself up and to risk like really genuinely loving again. And that's what Teddy Roosevelt said in that speech, The Man in the Arena. It's a good speech if you ever check it out. You can look it up
Yeah.
online. And but he just talks about some like character issues there, and like living a good life and not becoming bitter and cynical. And we see a lot of that in this day and age right now. We see that amongst like red pill people or feminist people or political people, right? So much bitterness and
Mm-hmm.
cynicism. And it's really, I think it's what contributes to this like bad vibe that's
Mm-hmm.
everywhere online. And it's
Mm-hmm.
been there for a while now, but there's this everywhere you look, bitter, cynical, exploitative. And then it's like we wonder why we're feeling so icky. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we wonder why we're feeling so icky when nothing's lofty, nothing's holy,
Mm-hmm.
everything's just ugh. And
Yeah.
I don't
It's
know,
all negative.
but
What?
like,
Sorry, what was that? Sorry, you cut out there. What?
do you see that kind of stuff too, where it's
Oh,
just like
yeah.
we're
I feel
cynical?
like Yeah, I feel like most people see the world that way, like glasses half empty, and jaded and bitter, and it's contagious, and it's like everything they watch and they eat and they do is all low vibe negative activities, and they don't realize that they're shaping they're manifesting their world through their, if you're showing up with negative intentions and negative mindset, then that's what you're going to live. It's not going to, you can't embody negativity and expect to live in positivity. So
That's a good one.
I completely agree. That's why no matter what I've been through, I always try to show up with a positive attitude. Because really, what is the point if we're just gonna give up and be cynical? It's like, why do you even want to live?
Right. I
Like,
mean, and that's what it is, though, right? That's what they're done. A lot of people have
yeah,
just given up, and they
yeah,
kind of take, and that's what Teddy Roosevelt talks about in the speech. He says some people take this like distorted sense of pride in their cynicism,
yes,
because that's the part of the speech where he says it's not the critic who counts, it's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better, but it's like the person who's in the arena trying to live and to do things and accomplish things. And I think that extends to all areas of life. It's like, who's the person that is actually trying to love? Like the person who is independent, that is trying to love and trying to connect with others. Because, and this is something I noticed the other day too, and this is going to offend some people probably, but when I think you even like this post, but I said there's something that happens to women who are loved right, where it seems like they just don't age as much, and it's like they're like something youthful in them gets preserved. And I was like, it's like the benefits of a healthy relationship. But a lot of women in there couldn't help themselves but to say things like, no, you don't need the man in any way. You can just give that all to yourself with self love. Or why is even looking youthful and ideal? And like to me, when I heard all of that, it's like, I'm not saying self love's not good, but there's certainly something special about a relationship. Like I should be able to talk about special aspects of a relationship without it making people triggered, because
mm-hmm.
that's what it was. Like they were noticing, it's usually the single people, of course, too, but they're like, oh, it bothered them that I was talking about an ideal of
Right.
a relationship can be special. And like, that's, uh-oh, she's gone. Well, her phone was about to die, so that might have to be the end of it. Blink. If she comes back, we'll put her back on. But what I was saying about that was people who, when we get bothered by things, that's what's important to pay attention to. Like I notice what I get bothered by. There are certain things that I get bothered by, which is black and white thinking. Or if someone thinks that I disagree
I
with one
mean,
thing. You
sorry,
back?
sorry. There, I'm back.
Okay. I thought your phone might have
Sorry,
died.
sorry. My daughter was calling, and I'm trying to dismiss it, and it's cutting you
Ah,
out. Sorry.
there you go. But so what I was saying was with that, people who were single were getting upset because it was making them think, oh no, like it bothered them to hear about the good things of a relationship. It seems like, oh, you only need yourself. But I was like, well, to me, those are the people that like Teddy Roosevelt was talking about a little bit about just like you think you just need you. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's super important to be independent first, right? To be in that emotionally mature place. But I think it's a mistake to think that should also be the finish line. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, no, there's something extra special that can happen when you connect with somebody. And don't
Mm-hmm.
get me wrong, I'm guilty of not being there either. Like I'm not in a long-term relationship right now, but I'm really working on getting through that hump of thinking like, yeah, you don't want to just rely on you. Like the self-love is great, taking care of your mind, body, and spirit's great, but there is something extra special about like a loving relationship with somebody. And that
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't, it just is.
Yeah.
Like I don't think it should be a negative thing to say,
No.
but the people who are a little not quite in a good place with it, they get bothered by it.
Right, because it triggers them, like you said, and it's like they know deep down inside that they have something to work on, but they hide behind that narrative, and then
Well,
it's like
feel less than. Like it makes them feel
exactly
less than to if I talk about a positive. And I'm not in a relationship either. So theoretically it should make me feel less than too. But
right.
like I don't have the wound with it, I don't think, where it's like, oh no, okay, I get it. There's certainly something positive about a relationship. And I think it should be talked about and
Mm-hmm.
celebrated.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean like how other people are doing things is wrong,
Right.
but it's like everyone has their path. And
Hmm.
people have to go through that hyper independence phase sometimes to even truly be in a healthy relationship at some point. It's just where you are, right? And life is
Exactly.
full of these cycles.
Hmm. Exactly. And it's good that you're speaking that truth, because whether they admit it or not, usually that has a lasting impact when those people hear that. Some light bulb goes off sometimes, whether they admit it or not. If no one's speaking the truth and they just live in that narrative or that excuse forever. So someone has to say it, whether it affects them or not, that's up to them. But keep speaking the truth.
Right. Well, and that's the other thing about it too, because like I talked about it in like it can make women seem younger when they're being loved right, and the people were saying, "Oh, you can just self-love yourself into that too," and it's like I don't know about that because like humans are connected creatures, like we are social
Exactly.
creatures. There's not we can't do everything on our own. Like
Right.
you need someone to have a child. Now we've done things with science where like, oh yeah, okay, you can do like in utero or something like that. But for the most part, you still need something from someone else
Hmm.
to create another human being. So that connection piece, people are just really hesitant to acknowledge that there can be something special about the connection too. Like there's certain things that you can get in a relationship that you just can't get on your own. And like when two independent people come together, you can create interdependence and there can be synergy where you can create more together than you could individually. So
Hmm.
like that's the point to be
Yeah.
striving to me. It's like, and that just is like when two independent people can come together, they can often create more together than they could apart. Now, if you're not a good match, then maybe you can deplete each other instead. And
Hmm.
let's face it, that does happen a lot too, right? That
Hmm.
happens where people come together and not only are they not independent to begin with, but now they become less than.
Hmm.
And even when people are independent, it doesn't mean the relationship's going to work out either. Like there
Hmm.
still might be compatibility issues or something else that pops up. But that interdependent state, I think it's something to strive for.
Hmm. It's true, and I basically that's the whole reason why I'm, moving on from my past, is because I do feel that you're meant to have a connection and meant to thrive. So I'm like,
Sure.
if I didn't believe that, I would have basically stayed in my situation. But I'm saying I know that there's connections, and that love fostering each other, you grow and stronger. And but like you said, if that's the question I think we need to ask, is the relationship depleting you, or fulfilling you, or making you a better person? Because I think we stay in relationships too long, like you said, for all those stories we tell ourselves, instead of just the simple question, is it depleting you? Because a relationship should never deplete you.
I mean, my favorite definition of a soulmate was the person that helps you to be the most you can be and forces you to grow the most as a person, keeping in mind that not all growth is comfortable. So it's
I
from
love
6 Feet Under the show. But
so
that's
good.
true. It's like, are you able to be you with this person?
Yes,
And
that's
can
so
you
good.
also help each other grow? And it's usually not going to be comfortable growth, right?
Right.
And there's a difference though between the uncomfortability of growth and the uncomfortability of something depleting you. And so it
Yes.
becomes essential to understand what that difference is for yourself.
Yes, that's so good. Love it.
So it's keeping it simple. Keeping it simple has its benefits, right? So it's
Hmm.
like, and you can sense it, but the thing is, you can't truly sense it until you're in a good place. Like, you got to be in a good place for your lens to see things clearly.
Hmm.
And then if you're in a good place, you know what feeling good is like for you. And then you can truly accurately perceive, okay, this person is good for me.
Hmm.
But when you're not in a good place to begin with, the way you're perceiving it could be all distorted.
Exactly.
And like you're trying to get them to complete you or something like that. And that's always to me a red flag, usually too. It's like if you need this person to complete you, probably not the best. But when you can say to yourself, oh yeah, this person's good for me, and we just connect, like it's easy.
Hmm.
Because that is what it feels like a lot of times when you're with someone good for you. It's like, no, this is easy. Like
Exactly.
it might not stay easy, shit can happen, but at least you got that baseline where it feels like it doesn't feel like work. It'll probably turn into work at some point. Uh oh. You're gone again. We might have to wrap this up here soon too. You're gonna have these technical difficulties. But yeah, when you're actually with somebody in the beginning, it can it doesn't seem like work sometimes. It can just be like easy. Are you back? No. No. Maybe her phone did die this time. But oh well. We got a good 90 minutes with her though. She is also on Instagram. Her name is Amber on Instagram, Amber Lee. She does like some modeling stuff on Instagram as well. But if you got this far, I appreciate you watching. Also, some other announcements. February 18th, I'll be talking to George Simon again. He's the author of In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance. He also has got a new book, Essentials for the Journey, where he talks about the 10 commandments of life. Not in a religious sense, but just the 10 commandments of living a good life. Are you back again? No. Are you back again? Yeah, the connection's no good now.
I'm sorry.
So, we're to click you off because I don't see you're not updating. But so Dr. George Simon, that's what he's going to be. Are you there? Now there's no. Can you hear you?
I'm sorry that the children keep calling. They're home from school. I have to tell them not to call during my lives. I'm sorry.
Well, we can wrap this up here anyway. I was just giving them some announcements of some of the people I'll be interviewing soon. And HG Tutor is going to be February 20th. So if you have any questions that you'd want to hear me ask him, you can let me know about that. But any other closing thoughts, Amber?
No, it's been a pleasure. I loved our conversation. Hope we can do it again. And basically, just that we all need to be, fulfilling ourselves first before we're looking, or instead of looking for that in someone else, so that we could find relationships that fulfill each other, like we said, instead of draining each other. Most
Right on.
important.
Absolutely. Well, I
Yep.
appreciate you coming on here and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And where can people find you?
Amber Lee _ solidified sunshine. That's on Instagram.
Right on. So thanks again, Amber. I
Thank
appreciate you
you.
coming on. So
Bye,
long.
everyone. Bye.
Think.